The moon of Velra hung like a scar in the dark. The ground cracked and metal dust rose from the mines that never slept for years. The very people worked under the Empire's command, digging rare ore to feed war machines they could not even see. They were small in build, gray-skinned and soft-spoken, their eyes too wide for light that no longer touched their home. No ships came for them except the ones that took their children for contracts. The Empire called legal slavery they were. The forgotten race, and everyone acted like they deserved to be forgotten. Kiri. A young courier ran between mine stations carrying data chips and food packets. Their heart beat fast each time pirates passed overhead because pirates had more mercy than the tax collectors on bad weeks. They took half the food on good weeks, they only took one life. Kiri never looked up because there was never anything up there, until the day the beacon woke. The ancient transmitter, half buried in sand, flared to life when a minequake shook the cables and Kiri heard a voice in their head recorded centuries ago. A human voice, weak and tired, saying, "If anyone finds this, we are not your enemies. We are just lost together." Kiri did not know what a human was, but they pressed send on the old beacon out of desperation. 3 days later, the pirates came first, smelling a distress signal. They descended with burners and chains to take the miners for sale. Kiri ran through dust, trying to warn others when the sky split open, light flooded down, and a shadow fell over the whole valley. A ship larger than any seen in this region hovered without sound, sleek and black like a cut in space. Then came the voice over every frequency. "This is the Terran Starborn. Vessel Oathkeepers, cease attack and withdraw immediately." The pirates laughed at first. Their captain sent a missile. The missile disappeared mid-flight, turned to vapor. A moment later, every pirate weapon melted and every engine died. Ships fell gently to the ground like feathers, guided by an invisible hand, and no one died. The very crowded on the ridges, staring. Kiri looked up and saw the Terran symbol on the hull, a silver star surrounded by a circle of broken chains. A voice spoke again to the moon. "We heard your call. We do not come to rule, we come to help." The signal was translated in hundreds of languages. The Very had no word for help. That did not sound like a contract, but they understood the tone of promise. When the Oathkeeper landed, its shields flared gold to push away the toxic dust. Humans in armored suits stepped down, moving with caution. Their helmets reflected the fires around them. The first to speak was Captain Reyes' calm, measured voice carrying through the translator. "Your people were listed as extinct in Imperial records. That is a lie. We see you. We stand with you." The miners did not believe him at first because no one ever stood with them before. Not even their own kind. The Empire had divided them by zones, so they could never unite. But the sight of humans tending the injured, carrying water and food without asking for payment, stirred something buried deep. Kiri watched a human medic kneel beside a dying Very child and work until the pulse returned. The child's mother wept and touched the medic's helmet in gratitude. Reyes stood at the ridge looking at the mines and said quietly, "No species should live like this." One of his officers answered, "But Captain Command will not approve intervention," Reyes replied. "Then we act first and explain later." His orders sent half the crew into the shafts to rescue trapped workers before the mine collapsed again. Far away, the Imperial Prefect of Sector Tyrannus received reports that a Terran ship was operating. Without permission in restricted space, he laughed and told his staff to broadcast that Velra was a criminal moon filled with illegals. He promised a bonus to whoever brought him the Terran captain's head. He did not realize that the footage of the pirates surrendering had already spread across the outer nets and was now being watched by workers who had never seen a Terran before. Some felt something dangerous, hope. That night, under the glow of broken stars, Kiri walked to the human camp and spoke through a translator. "You came." Why? Reyes looked at the child, thin and dust-covered, and said, "Because no one else did." He handed Kiri a light stick that glowed blue in the dark and added, "Keep this when you see our beacon again. It means we kept our word." Kiri nodded, not understanding everything but feeling for the first time that someone saw them as alive, not as numbers or ore units. At dawn, the Oathkeeper lifted off, slow and silent, its hull scarred but unbroken. The miners gathered on the plain, watching until the sky closed behind it, and for hours no one spoke because for the first time in their memory, the sound of engines had brought safety, not fear. Kiri held the blue light and whispered to the dust, "They will come back." And somewhere above the clouds, Reyes looked at the map of the sector where dozens of other forgotten worlds waited, and said to his crew, "Mark them all. We start with one moon, and we keep going until no one is forgotten." Proof in a clock, the next. Sunrise on Velra was pale and sickly, but for the first time there was movement that did not come from chains. The Oathkeeper remained in orbit, and dropships came down again, this time carrying containers of food and clean water. Human engineers began setting up portable shelters that filtered the poison air. The Very watched with suspicion, but hunger pushed pride aside. Kiri worked beside a human medic named Hana, whose suit always hummed softly as it cleaned the air. She smiled behind her helmet as she taught Kiri how to seal a wound using gel instead of dirty bandage. Hana never treated Kiri like an animal or a project. She just said people heal faster when they feel seen, and that was something Kiri had never heard before in the command bay of the Oathkeeper. Captain Reyes studied holographic scans of the moon showing collapsed tunnels and radiation leaks. His science officer reported signs of illegal mining by the Empire's corporate arm, evidence that the Very had been exploited for decades. Reyes ordered the data copied and encrypted. It would serve as proof when the Empire tried to deny what had been done below them. A comm alert came in from an Imperial prefect demanding immediate withdrawal, claiming Velra was Imperial property. Reyes responded calmly, "Velra was home to the Very before your maps had names. We will stay until the wounded are safe." The line went silent for a moment. Then the reply came back. "The Empire will send a blockade within 2 days. Surrender the Terran ship or Velra will face punishment." Kiri overheard the words through open comm relays and felt cold fear. Old memories of raids and executions rushing back, the elders gathered to discuss evacuation. But most were too weak to travel. The humans promised to stay, but the Very had seen what happened to anyone who defied the Empire. One elder hissed that trusting outsiders would bring doom. Another said the humans' kindness would make the punishment worse. Kiri wanted to shout that they were already living punishment, but could not find courage until Hana knelt beside them and said, "Sometimes courage is just one person refusing to hide." First, Kiri clenched their small fists and whispered, "Then, I will refuse to hide." As the blockade ships arrived, their shadows blotted out the weak sun. The Oathkeeper raised shields and went silent. Reyes ordered no first strike. "We show them restraint." The crew prepared defensive positions, non-lethal weapon pods, and EMP nets. The Empire broadcast a message across the system demanding the Terrans surrender themselves and deliver the Very leaders within 20 standard hours, or the moon would be sterilized. Kiri listened to the countdown echoing through comm channels, each hour a reminder that time was running out. On the surface, Kiri searched through the old tunnels with Hana, looking for more survivors, and stumbled upon an ancient hangar sealed. Since before the mines existed inside, they found skeletons of ships, long rusted but clearly not of Imperial design. Hana scanned them and her visor displayed old Terran serial numbers. She realized these were the remains of the first Terran explorers who had gone missing centuries ago. Maybe that was why the Oathkeeper came here first. Kiri touched the metal hull and whispered, "They were here long before us." Hana smiled faintly and said, "Then we are family through time." The discovery gave Reyes the proof he needed to show that Velra's people were not trespassers, but descendants of those first settlers twisted by generations of hardship. When the Imperial broadcast repeated the deadline, the Oathkeeper transmitted a new message in return. Captain Reyes appeared calm, his words simple. "We will not fire, but we will not leave behind those who cannot flee if you strike. We will defend life. You decide what history will remember." The Empire jammed the frequency immediately, yet recordings of his words spread across worker channels carried by smugglers and miners who had already lost faith in Imperial truth. Kiri's brother Sorrow had vanished months before, taken by the Empire for unpaid quotas. Now the proof of the old Terran wrecks gave Kiri hope that maybe Sorrow was alive somewhere, that the humans could help find him. Kiri went to Reyes and begged him to look into the transport records. Reyes nodded and promised, "We will search, but first we keep your people safe." As the final hours of the deadline ticked down, the Empire's ships began tightening, their orbit hundreds of ion cannons aimed down at the moon. The Oathkeeper's crew worked around the clock, setting up shield generators across settlements. Reyes walked through the corridors, checking on every team when he passed the hangar where Kiri stood. He paused and asked, "Are you afraid?" Kiri answered, "Yes, but I am still here." He smiled and said, "That is all courage ever is." Hana treated more wounded until her hands shook from exhaustion. She looked at the clock and whispered to Kiri, "We have maybe 5 hours left." The countdown tone echoed through the comm and then stopped, replaced by a burst of static. The blockade had jammed every signal, cutting the moon from the rest of space. Kiri looked up at the faint glow where the Oathkeeper orbited and clutched the blue light Reyes had given them, hoping it would shine again. In orbit, the bridge was silent except for hums of power lines. Reyes stood watching the fleet closing in. He turned to his officers and said, "They want to make an example of us. But examples work both ways. Record everything when the first shot comes. Make sure the galaxy sees who fired it." First, his crew nodded and prepared as the timer on the console reached 0. The sensors flashed red, an energy surge spiking from the lead Imperial destroyer. The first shot of war was about to fall on Velra, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Forgotten would not die alone. Ambush and mercy, the first blast did not hit the surface because the Oathkeeper moved faster than any machine in orbit had the right to move. Shields flared and the sky burned white as plasma hit them. The shockwave rolled across Velra's dust plains like thunder. Captain Reyes stood firm on the bridge, eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Imperial ships were moving in formation, expecting to crush an old freighter, not realizing they faced the Starborn flagship. The humans had been silent for centuries, perfecting methods that turned energy into protection, not destruction. Every shot they took came with care because they refused to become the monsters they fought against. Reyes whispered, "Steady, no lethal response," and the crew obeyed. Below on the ground, Kiri watched streaks of light falling from the heavens like a second sunrise. The Very cried out in fear as sonic booms shook the fragile shelters. Hana grabbed Kiri and pushed them. Under a collapsed beam as debris rained, she kept saying, "They will hold, they promised." Kiri wanted to believe it, because the humans had kept every promise so far. When the shaking stopped, Kiri crawled out and saw Imperial drones descending like locusts, dropping soldiers in black armor. Their orders were simple: capture. Terran personnel seize Very children as hostages. Kiri ran toward the nearest shelter, screaming for the miners to hide, while Hana stayed to protect the wounded, her hands trembling as she drew a small shock baton in orbit. Reyes read the reports of multiple dropships breaking atmosphere. He gave the order, "Deploy wardens." The Oathkeeper's defense drones launched like flares, cutting through clouds, then vanished into stealth fields. They reappeared only to disable weapons and jam communications. The Empire's fleet commander, Admiral Tolvek, cursed and sent more firepower. Reyes sighed quietly, saying, "They still do not understand. Mercy is stronger than fear." He watched one enemy cruiser break formation, its engines flaming out after a single well-placed EMP burst. Reyes ordered immediate rescue of the crew, who were now drifting in the void. His officers stared, surprised that he would save an enemy. Reyes only said, "If we let them die, we become them." On Velra, chaos spread as the black-armored soldiers herded children toward the landing zone. Kiri ducked behind a broken loader and threw a rock to draw them away. One soldier turned and fired a stun beam. Missing by inches, Kiri tackled him with desperate strength, managing to press the activation button on his own gauntlet. It overloaded his armor, and he fell twitching. Hana arrived a moment later, helping Kiri drag 2 children to cover their faces, streaked with dust. Hana's voice was calm even as explosions sounded around them. "We will get them all back, we have to." Then she contacted the Oathkeeper and shouted coordinates before her channel cut off under the jamming field inside the bridge. Reyes listened to the static and clenched his jaw. He turned to the tactical officer, "Patch me through to our covert link." They opened a narrow band connection to their hidden relay network. The voice that answered belonged to Lyra, the young sensor tech from a neutral station who had been secretly feeding them data. She whispered, "Admiral Tolvek is broadcasting to the Empire that you attacked first. The footage is falsified." Reyes closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Then we show them the truth. Record everything from every angle. When this is over, no one will be able to lie about what happened." Meanwhile, Kiri and Hana found a group of Very trapped in a collapsed tunnel, among them an old miner who said he saw Sorrow taken hours before by Imperial commandos heading for a shuttle. Kiri felt the world tilt. Sorrow alive, captured again. Hana squeezed their hand and said, "We will find him together." They pushed forward through smoke and screaming alarms until they reached the shuttle bay, but the ship had already lifted off its engines, cutting a fiery path into the clouds. Kiri fell to their knees, whispering brother again. Taken. Hana lifted them up and said, Then we chase them. We never stop chasing. Back in orbit, Reyes caught the signal from that same shuttle now docked with a prison barge near the blockade perimeter. Scans showed hundreds of life signs. Reyes realized the Empire was holding captives from other forgotten worlds and planned to destroy the barge and blame the Terrans. His heart burned, but his voice stayed steady. He told his crew plot, Intercept course, we save them all or none. The Oathkeeper turned engines roaring like thunder, its massive hull cutting through the blockade lines. Enemy ships tried to form a net, but every time they fired, the Terran shields bent the beams aside. Not by brute force, but by precision modulation. Every strike reflected harmlessly into space. The Empire crews watching began to hesitate, wondering if maybe the humans were not here. To kill it all on Velra, the surviving Veri saw the enemy retreating as the Terran drones swept the sky. Neutralizing last stragglers, Hana sat beside Kiri, who held the rescued children close. She looked toward the heavens where trails of light marked the Oathkeeper's flight path and said, Your brother will see that light and know we are coming. Kiri nodded and whispered, They heard us once. They will hear us again. The Imperial Admiral, watching from his flagship, clenched his claws and snarled, They save everyone but themselves, prepare a trap when they go after the prisoners, we end them. Reyes did not yet know that his act of mercy had set the next stage of war, but he felt the truth deep inside. Mercy always comes with a price, and he was ready to pay it for the forgotten fire and price. The Oathkeeper cut through the blockade like a storm of light. Every system in the ship burned hot, and the decks trembled under strain, but no one wavered. Captain Reyes stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by smoke and the glow of warning lights, his eyes fixed on the map, showing the prison barge drifting near the gate, its engines pulsing with a strange rhythm that could only mean one thing. A trap the Empire wanted to make humanity look like executioners. Reyes ordered shields full and medical bays prepared. No one dies if we can help it. The crew moved like one body. They knew what was at stake. Thousands of captives across dozens of races, including the Veri Kiri's brother. Among them, the Empire broadcast a false transmission showing fabricated footage of the Terrans attacking civilian ships. But the Oathkeeper's sensors recorded the real feed, showing the barge priming an overload sequence in its reactor. Reyes had seconds to decide he could pull back and save his crew or push forward and take the hit to protect the prisoners. He chose without hesitation. Full power. Forward, brace for impact. The engines screamed, the stars twisted, and the Oathkeeper slammed between the barge and the Imperial fleet, absorbing the explosion shields, flickering bright gold as plasma washed over them. Hull plates buckled, decks cracked, but the ship held. The shockwave spread across the void, throwing Imperial ships into disarray. In the medical bay, Hana was thrown against the wall but caught herself and rushed to help the wounded. Alarms wailed through the corridors. She heard the captain's voice over comms, calm, even as chaos reigned. We will not break this ship. Stands for those who cannot stand. Kiri, who had come aboard with a rescue team after the last battle, clung to the bulkhead, their chest tight with fear. When the shaking stopped, they unbuckled and ran to the hangar where dropships were being readied. Reyes met them there, his armor scorched, his face streaked with ash. Kiri shouted, My brother is in that barge. Reyes nodded and said, Then we go get him. The rescue team launched in silence, their craft weaving through debris and fire. The prison barge was half torn apart, its hull glowing from heat. Kiri looked through the viewport and saw broken cells, bodies floating, but also movement faint and desperate. They docked against a torn hatch. Hana cut through the seal with her tool, and they entered smoke and gravity shifting with every step. The corridors were filled with trapped prisoners of many species, chained and left to die. The rescue team moved fast, unlocking cells and pulling survivors into the shuttle. Kiri stumbled into a side chamber and saw a familiar figure slumped against the wall. Sorrow, his wrists burned, his voice weak but alive. He looked up and whispered, You came. Kiri fell beside him, tears mixing with dust, saying, I promised. Outside, the Oathkeeper tried to keep the Imperial ships at bay, firing bursts of light that disabled sensors but avoided lethal shots. The enemy admiral screamed into his comms that the Terrans were destroying evidence, unaware that his own broadcast had been hijacked. Reyes had his communications. Officer send live footage of the rescue to every open channel across the sector. The truth flooded the networks. Millions watched as humans risked death to save enemies and strangers, while the Empire fired on its own captives. The lie unraveled in real time. Hana's team loaded the last of the survivors, but one of the shuttles was damaged, flames licking at its hull. Reyes told them to go without him, but Kiri grabbed his arm and said no one left behind. Those words echoed the oath engraved on the Oathkeeper's bridge. Reyes smiled tiredly and said, "Then we hold together." The shuttle lifted off under heavy fire and streaked back toward the Terran ship as explosions filled the sky. When they returned, the Oathkeeper's decks were half flooded with smoke, medics running everywhere. Hana collapsed beside Saro, checking his pulse, while Kiri watched Reyes giving quiet orders. Despite the blood on his shoulder, the captain looked at them and said, "Your people have strength, never lose it." Kiri wanted to thank him, but words failed. The ship shuddered again as another blast hit the shields, the enemy still firing, despite the truth already spreading across space far away on an Imperial command world. Officials watched the live footage with horror, realizing that their narrative was falling apart. One minister whispered that maybe the humans were not invaders but saviors. Another ordered the transmission blocked, but it was too late. The networks of the outer worlds had already mirrored it, and rebellion was brewing. On Velra, the Veri elders gathered around makeshift screens, watching the same broadcast, their old eyes wide with awe as they saw their own rescued children among the Terran crews. For the first time in memory, hope spread faster than fear. The Empire had spent centuries breaking them apart. Now the truth of mercy was stitching them back together. Inside the Oathkeeper, Reyes sat in the medbay as Hana cleaned the burns. On his arm, he looked at the exhausted faces around him and said quietly, "They wanted to make us monsters. Instead, they made us teachers, but teaching comes with pain. We have shown them who we are now. We must show them we endure outside the viewport." The wreckage of the prison barge drifted slowly, lit by the pale blue glow of Terran rescue lights, and the dead silence of space carried one unspoken promise. This was only the beginning, witnesses in a turning tide. The smoke that wrapped the Oathkeeper began to fade as repair crews worked without rest. Sparks fell like slow rain across the decks. Captain Reyes stood at the main viewport, watching the remains of the prison barge drift into silence. He knew the Empire would twist the truth again, but he also knew that truth was already beyond their reach. The footage had spread far across the outer networks through smugglers, miners, and free traders. Everyone had seen the humans saving the dying while the Empire fired on its own prisoners. It was no longer possible to hide what mercy looked like. In the command pit, Lyra, the sensor tech from the border station, appeared on a secure holo. Her face pale but determined, she whispered, "They know the recordings are real." But the Empire ordered all stations to erase them. Reyes asked, "Did you obey?" Lyra shook her head. "No, Captain, I leaked them instead." Reyes smiled and said, "Then you just changed a galaxy." Lyra replied, "You better make it worth it, because they are hunting me now," and the line went dead. On Velra, the news spread through the mines like wildfire. The Veri, who once hid from sunlight, now stood in open spaces watching holograms of the Terrans fighting to save them. Even the oldest elders wept and said, "The curse is broken." Kiri, who had stayed aboard the Oathkeeper since the rescue, felt pride for the first time in their life. Walking among human engineers repairing hull plates, they could sense something shifting in the universe. For once the forgotten were being remembered. But hope is never left alone for long. The Imperial prefect, enraged by the loss of the prisoners, summoned a new weapon, a planet-killer torpedo built in secret. Its purpose to erase Velra and prove that the Empire still ruled through fear. He ordered its launch within 2 days to destroy not just the Veri, but the humans who protected them. The fleet under his command prepared, while spreading rumors that the Terrans had brought disease and rebellion. In the middle of this rising tension, a strange visitor approached the Oathkeeper, a single silver ship carrying the crest of the alien Tavari Knights, an ancient order sworn to codes of battle and honor. The knight's name was Sir Thylan, a tall, scaled warrior whose people once fought the humans. Centuries ago, he hailed the Oathkeeper and challenged Reyes to single-ship combat, saying, If I defeat you, the Terrans will leave this region. If you defeat me, I will serve as witness to your cause. Reyes understood the meaning of this challenge. If he refused, it would be seen as weakness. If he accepted and killed the knight, it would confirm the Empire's claim that humans were bloodthirsty. So he answered, "We accept, but no one dies today." The duel took place above Velra, two ships circling, like hawks across the stars. The Tavari fighter was fast and elegant, its pilot skilled beyond measure. But the Oathkeeper moved with precision. Every strike from the knight's cannons was dodged or deflected until Reyes used a gravity pulse to disable the engines instead of destroying them. Serthalin's ship spun out and drifted powerless. Reyes opened a channel and said, "Yield and live." The knight stared through his cracked visor and whispered, "You could have ended me." "Why did you stop?" Reyes answered. "Because that is not victory, that is extinction." Talon bowed his head and said, "Then I will stand beside you from this day forward." When the knight's message reached other systems, people began to question everything. How could monsters earn the loyalty of an honorable Tavari? A race that never bent to anyone, whispers spread and grew into open talk of rebellion. Smugglers who once avoided Terran signals now began smuggling food and medicine to Velra and to the Oathkeeper's fleet. Ships from hidden colonies came forward bringing supplies and refugees. They called it the Starborn Accord. A movement of those who believed mercy could be stronger than power. Kiri spent their nights in the hangar, where the rescued Veri slept beside. Humans and other races, everyone worked together without command. Hana moved through the crowd, helping each wounded being with the same care she gave the humans. Kiri sat beside her once and said, "Do you think it will last?" Hana smiled softly. "It has. If it does not, then everything dies together." Far across space, the Imperial Prefect watched reports of unrest from his throne of glass. His advisors warned him that the sector was slipping away. He slammed his claws into the table and screamed, "They think hope can save them, then let them choke on despair. Prepare the weapon, target the very moon." His officers hesitated, knowing millions of civilians lived there, but fear made them obey. Back on the Oathkeeper, alarms sounded the moment the weapon left hyperspace. Reyes ran to the bridge, his face calm but voice-sharp. "Status report," an officer replied. "Planet killer torpedo inbound, guided by a beacon hidden in Velra's crust impact." In 5 hours, the crew went silent. Reyes turned to his helmsman and said, "Set course, intercept. We will not run this time." The ship groaned as its engines ignited, climbing out of orbit. The crew knew that the blast could destroy them all. But no one left their post. They believed in what they had become, witnesses to a new kind of strength. Kiri looked down at Velra, glowing faintly beneath them, and whispered to Saro, who stood beside them, "If this is the end, at least." "We end," remembered Saro. Nodded, his voice quiet. "Then we will make sure no one forgets." Again. The Oathkeeper rose into the dark, ready to meet the fire that waited above, knowing the next few hours would decide not just their fate, but the meaning of humanity's return to the stars, the long night and the stand. The silence before the storm was the kind that pressed against the skin like cold metal. The stars ahead were bright and cruel. The planet killer moved across them, a spear of light built only for death. Captain Reyes stood at the center of the Oathkeeper's bridge, every screen flickering between red and static. The air was heavy with heat and the faint smell of ozone. The torpedo's trajectory was locked on Velra, and its speed was too high for interception by conventional means. Reyes ordered power to shields and weapons to stand by, but his voice stayed calm as he said, "We will hold and we will not kill unless there is no choice." In the engineering deck's, crews worked like ghosts, their faces smeared with grease. As sparks danced around them, Hana moved through, the smoke helping technicians stabilize power cells while whispering small words of hope that no one fully heard. Kiri and Saro stood by the lower access hatch, watching red lights blink like dying stars. Saro asked, "What happens if we fail?" Kiri answered quietly, "Then we become the story others will finish, far away in the Imperial fleet." The prefect watched with satisfaction as his weapon carved through space. His advisors warned that the blast would wipe out Imperial loyalists still stationed on Velra, but the prefect laughed, saying fear will remind them who rules the stars. He sent orders to the blockade to attack the Oathkeeper, The moment its shields fell, unaware that his transmission had been intercepted by Lyra, who now hid inside a mining outpost rerouting comms to the Oathkeeper. Her voice cracked with static as she said, "They mean to finish you. Even if the torpedo hits the moon, they will strike again." Reyes answered, "Then they will learn what it means to fight someone who refuses to surrender." The Oathkeeper positioned itself between Velra and the oncoming torpedo, its shields already strained from earlier battles. Reyes stood tall as the countdown to impact filled the room. 20 seconds. 1918. Every heartbeat sounded louder than the alarms. Then the voice of Sir Thalan echoed through comms, his Tavari fleet of a single ship, recharging weapons. "I will strike the core when it passes close. I will not survive." Reyes said, "No, we do this together." The knight replied, "There is no together if no one is left to remember the lesson," and he cut the channel. The torpedo streaked past Oathkeeper's bow, glowing white. The knight's small ship darted out and slammed into its side. A flash brighter than day tore through the void. The explosion rippled through space. The Oathkeeper's shields flared gold, then shattered fragments rained across the hull. The knight's ship vanished in light, but the torpedo broke apart, its pieces burning in the upper atmosphere of Velra. Reyes whispered to the silence he kept his oath. The crew cheered, but only for a heartbeat before sensors screamed again. A second wave of Imperial destroyers had arrived, surrounding them. From all sides, hundreds of fighters swarming like insects. Reyes steadied his voice and said, "Prepare to be boarded, non-lethal defenses only. We fight for lives, not for pride." Marines armed with stun rifles took positions in the corridors. The lights flickered and smoke filled the air as enemy shuttles latched onto the hull. Kiri and Saro joined a team guarding the very shelter below. Hana moved the wounded deeper into the ship while explosions shook the decks above them. The first breach came. At cargo bay, 3 black armored soldiers poured through. Reyes watched through internal cams as his crew fought with precision stun bursts and gravity pulses, knocking invaders down, but never killing them. He could see hesitation in the eyes of the attackers when they realized the humans were sparing them in a war that was supposed to be merciless. Some began to lower their weapons. Others turned against their officers, confusion spreading faster than the fire in the halls. On the surface of Velra, the very miners saw the sky light up with the glow of the battle. They sent coded signals to jam Imperial guidance systems, using old mining arrays reprogrammed by Lyra. The moon itself was fighting back, her voice carried across the net, saying, "Hold them for 1 more hour. I will make the stars listen to you again." Inside the reactor core, Saro worked with Hana, trying to stabilize the ship's failing power grid. He moved with purpose. Even as heat rose to unbearable levels, he shouted, "Over the noise, if we lose containment, the ship will break apart." Hana yelled, "Then don't lose it," and kept working, her gloves melting as she tightened the coolant valves. Kiri watched them through the blast window, whispering a prayer for both up. On the bridge, Reyes wiped blood from his temple, the hull readings dropping fast. The tactical officer shouted, "More ships incoming from the outer ring." Reyes whispered to himself as the lights flickered, "We have 1 hour. That is enough." He turned to his crew, every face lit by the glow of the dying consoles. He said, "We are not the first to bleed, and we will not be the last to stand. They cannot understand mercy because they have never been shown any, but today they will see it." Outside, the stars were filled with fire debris floating like snow as the Oathkeeper turned slowly to face the heart of the Imperial fleet, its engines sputtering yet still alive. Reyes gripped the railing and said to his helm, "This is not where we end, this is where we begin." The ship steadied itself, surrounded by darkness and flame, while far away the faint pulse of Lyra's broadcast began to spread across the network, carrying live feeds of the battle, showing the world what defiance looked like. When mercy refused to die, fulfillment and a promise kept the Oathkeeper floated in the heart of darkness, her engines cracked and her shields gone. But the spirit inside her burned brighter than any weapon. The Imperial fleet surrounded her on all sides, their guns charged, ready to fire. Captain Reyes stood straight, though blood streaked his face, and every light on the bridge blinked red. His crew waited for the final order. None of them wanted to die, but none of them would leave. They had come too far to abandon the ones who still looked up from Velra, believing that help would hold until the end. The captain raised his hand and said, "Open a wideband channel to every ship, every world, every frequency. They can jam our signals, but they cannot silence truth." The image of the bridge flickered across 1,000 screens. Reyes spoke quietly, but the words carried power. "This is Captain Elias Reyes of the Terran Starborn Fleet. We stand between cruelty and the forgotten we have taken." Pure fire and answered with mercy. "We have shown that strength is not fear, and today we choose not destruction but peace. Those who still believe in honor stand down, those who still believe in freedom. Join us." The message went beyond human language. It reached hearts that had known only obedience for generations, and something in them cracked. On the Imperial flagship, Admiral Tolvek screamed to his officers to open fire, but half the crews refused. One shouted, "We will not shoot at those who save." The innocent mutiny spread through the fleet faster than the Admiral could react. Ships turned their weapons away. Their engines' dimmed signals of surrender flashed through the void. One by one, destroyers powered down their weapons. The prefect, watching from his palace on a distant world, felt the cold grip of fear as he realized his empire was dying, not by war, but by truth. Kiri and Saro stood in the hangar, surrounded by survivors of many races, humans, Veri, and even Imperial soldiers who had laid down their arms. Hana moved among them, treating wounds with the last of her supplies, her face pale but calm. She said softly, "The storm is breaking." Kiri looked up through the cracked viewport and saw the impossible hundreds of shadows emerging from hyperspace, ghostly silver ships shaped like wings of light. The Starborn fleet, hidden for decades, appearing without sound or fanfare. Reyes saw them too and whispered reinforcement from Earth. The ghosts of the Terran colonies had answered the call. Ghost Fleet did not attack. Instead, they spread across the battlefield, releasing pulses of energy that disabled weapon systems across every Imperial ship. With surgical precision, lights went dark, engines shut down, no lives lost, only silence. The humans had mastered control to the point where war could end without slaughter. One of the fleet's admirals transmitted to all channels. The terms were simple: free all captives, end the labor camps, sign the Starborn Compact, or lose the right to rule any world again. The message reached every corner of the Empire, carried by traitors and rebels alike. Admiral Tolvek refused the order and turned his flagship toward the Oathkeeper, shouting that he would rather die than kneel to savages. Before he could strike, his own gunners locked his controls and powered down the ship. They looked at Reyes on the screen and saluted quietly. The war was over, not by conquest but by choice. The prefect's last command never reached them. His transmission, cut by rebellion rising inside his own palace. The Oathkeeper drifted slowly toward Velra to land for the first time. Without fear, the survivors lined the decks, watching the scorched moon glow beneath them. Hana leaned against a wall, exhausted, her suit torn and voice barely a whisper. "We did it." Kiri held Saro close, tears in their eyes. "Yes, but look how much it cost." Reyes listened and said softly, "Cost is what makes peace real." When they touched down, the Veri gathered around the landing site, the air still heavy with dust. Reyes walked down the ramp, first followed by humans and the rescued prisoners of many races. The elders of Velra stepped forward. One of them placed a hand on his chest and said, "Your kind were gone from the stars, and still you came back for us. We do not know how to thank you." Reyes smiled faintly and replied, "Then remember that mercy does not vanish even when it is forgotten." That is thanks enough. As night fell, the Oathkeeper's crew helped build signal towers and medical camps, the once silent moon now filled with laughter and light. For the first time in generations, the banners of the Starborn Compact flew above the ruins, marking not victory but beginning. Lyra's broadcast finally reached the core worlds, showing the moment of peace to billions across the galaxy. The story of the forgotten who were saved by those who refused to turn away. Reyes stood outside the ship, staring at the stars. One last time, Hana came beside him, her hands wrapped in bandages. She said, "Do you think they will learn from this?" He answered, "Maybe not all, but enough to change the course of what comes next." Kiri walked up, holding the blue light stick he had given them long ago. It still glowed softly in the dark. They lifted it high and said, "You kept your word." Captain Reyes nodded, his voice quiet but sure. "We always do." Above them, the Ghost Fleet began to fade into the night, their engines whispering through the void as they vanished back into the deep, leaving only the Oathkeeper and the new dawn over Velra. The forgotten were forgotten. No more humanity had returned, not to conquer but to remind the stars that compassion could be the sharpest weapon of all. The Starborn stand. The stars above Velra burned with a cold light as the Oathkeeper rested on the scarred surface, its hull dented and blackened but alive. The crew moved through the corridors, weary but unbroken. Captain Reyes walked among them, his boots echoing on metal floors that had seen fire and smoke and the ghosts of battles past. He looked at Kiri and Saro, standing with the rescued Veiri children, and said, "Today, we have done more than survive. We have shown what it means to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves." Far above the moon, the remnants of the Imperial fleet drifted powerless, their weapons shut down, their engines silent, their crews staring in disbelief at the Terran ships that had refused to fire unless necessary. Their code had been mercy, their strategy restraint, their victory had come not from slaughter but from courage. The ghost fleet that had arrived unseen now faded into nothingness, leaving behind the promise that humanity watches and protects even from the shadows. On the landing site, the Veiri elders gathered around the Terran officers, their voices trembling with words long forgotten. They thanked them not with gold or gifts, but with something far rarer, recognition that someone had seen them as people. The children laughed and ran through the dust, the first sound of joy on this world. In centuries, the humans handed out water and blankets tending to wounds, while Kiri held the blue light stick given long ago, remembering the promise that it represented. Hana moved through, the crowd checking the weak and the frightened, making sure no life was left behind. Even as the last alarms on the Oathkeeper died, she whispered quietly to herself, "Every soul matters," and here they all were alive. The corridors echoed with quiet footsteps and soft voices of relief. Saro knelt beside his sister, embracing her for the first time in years. The weight of captivity and fear lifted as if space itself had breathed for them. Captain Reyes walked to the bridge once more, looking out at the stars beyond Velra. He spoke to his crew softly, saying, "History will remember today. Not because we struck first, not because we conquered, but because we chose mercy when no one else would," and the men and women around him nodded, understanding that the Starborn were more than ships or weapons. They were the living promise that no one forgotten would remain forgotten. Across the sector, transmissions repeated the Starborn compact: in every system free. The captives end the trade, stop the cruelty, the words carried by traitors and spies and miners alike. Reaching corners of the Empire that had never dared hope, millions watched as truth replaced fear. The Imperial prefect tried to resist, but his orders were ignored by those who had seen the reality unfold. The tide had turned, not with fire, but with honor and courage. On Velra, the blue light in Kiri's hand seemed to glow brighter as they lifted it toward the sky, a symbol of hope for the Veiri and the humans who had chosen to stand beside them. The elders placed their hands on the children and whispered that the universe had remembered them at last. The dust of the mines rose with the wind, carrying laughter and relief, as the survivors began to rebuild a future that had once been stolen. The Oathkeeper rested silently, watching over them. Captain Reyes turned one last time to his crew, saying, "We leave soon, but the promise remains. We will return for those who cannot defend themselves. The ships of humanity will always sail in the shadows, ready to answer the call." And with that, the crew prepared to depart the moon that had been forgotten, now burned with life and the memory of the Starborn who had chosen to fight not for glory, but for all that was just and true. The skies over Velra cleared, and for the first time the stars reflected not fear but hope. Humanity had arrived when no one else would, and the galaxy would never forget the day the forgotten were finally seen. The end.